Hey guys, it's Mr. Thibodeau. Gonna jump right into our work for today. So, here we go. Controversies over territories. Now, first off, I want to kind of take a second to uh, talk about what they're opening here. Sometimes friends disagree, sometimes these disagreements can get out of hand. The United States has gained new territory, but the North and South couldn't agree on how to use it. That makes it sound pretty tame. I feel like, yeah, sometimes friends disagree. If if I think that you know black people should be free, or black people should be equal, or shouldn't be beaten regularly on a daily basis, and you think they should be, uh, that's not a disagreement. Like I I think there is a difference between a difference in opinion. If you think that monetary policy in America should be one way, and I think it should be another way. If we're debating on whether or not to build more highways or to build trains, if we're debating on whether or not to raise taxes, those are disagreements, sure. But if we're debating on whether or not a person has the right to be free or is considered a person, then I feel like that's a pretty different thing, you know? It's not a disagreement at that point. That's that's a whole different deal. In any case, the Compromise of 1850, which was similar to the Compromise of 1820, basically they kept kicking it down the road. Originally, and you'll see the Southerners talk about this differently. Um, a lot of the original founding fathers had wanted to end slavery. They realized that they couldn't because the South depended on it, and the South wouldn't agree on getting rid of slavery. But then also that the issue of slavery was, kind of critical to where they were at as a country. They needed that labor. Now, I personally believe that they would have been able to accomplish that labor without, you know, if black folks were free, they could still work. They could still do things. So they would just do it for themselves as opposed to making white guys rich. So I disagree at that, but that's beside the point. I think that in the beginning, what the compromise that the founding fathers did was they said that, I think it was in 20 years' time, no, we'll come back to this, and we will abolish the importation of slaves. And it was kind of the implication that that would also sort of abolish slavery at that point. This is why earlier I said that the cotton gin was the worst invention in the world, particularly because of its timing. If the cotton gin had happened 10, 20 years later, then slavery would have already been abolished. Slavery was not so entrenched in the United States until the cotton gin made it so viable, made cotton such a commodity. In any case, and the need for labor is so important. In any case, what's happening is they keep kicking the can down the road. They keep saying, okay, well, right now we're kind of equal between free states and slave states. And now, keep in mind, the only reason that slave states have a close to an equal representation with the North is because of the Three-Fifths Compromise. They're counting slaves as three-fifths of a person, even though those same slaves are not having their rights or not having their are not being protected by the Constitution. They are not being represented. Really, they should count as 0 parts of a person, okay? Because what's happening is that three-fifths are benefiting the white folks in charge, okay? And so they're considered to have a greater population and thus better representation, even though, again, that representation is not benefiting those African Americans. At this point, they're just African, right? They're really pretty fresh from Africa. They're definitely not being benefited. Now, of course, I personally believe that all people are people and should count as 100% of a person. But when in this particular case, counting a black person as 3/5 of a person for the purpose of districting and whether or not how much political clout the South has was really bad for the black people at the time. Black people would have preferred to have counted as 0 points of a person, right? Because then the South would have had less political power and slavery could have been abolished sooner. Okay. Now, with that set aside, they keep pushing this down the road. They keep saying that we can't have more slave states than free states, or we can't have more free states than slave states. Now, we'll get into exactly what was going on. The South actually was kind of in control. They had a lot more power because of that 3/5 compromise than the North. And so we see the Federal Marshals, okay, the Fugitive Slave Act, saying that even if slaves get to the North, they can be caught and brought back to the South. Okay, they were not free when they got to the North, even though the North had abolished slavery. And this idea that the federal government can force these northern states to send slaves, send escaped slaves back to the South was really important. And you saw a number of northern states who refused to allow these federal marshals in, or refused to let these federal marshals work within their borders. What today can you think of that this is similar to? Okay, a situation where some states are really, really strong against a certain group of people, and a federal group that is charged with finding and expelling these people, or jailing these people. Okay, it's not prisoners. Okay, what group today does this sound like? Okay, that's my question for you guys this week. All right, so there's the Free Soil Party, which is essentially a group of anti-slavery folks who are trying to come to power, and they're not really all that successful, but they have some options. We get a number of people who are trying to either do some compromises and work together, and other people who are trying to get their way figured out or another. Okay, Henry Clay, he did the Missouri Compromise, and then he's trying to do more. We see some pretty awful examples of slavery, right? That's all from whips. This guy was beaten bloody, and that's all scar tissue. Okay. Now, I think it's important to know that, and Africans in the North talks about this, African Americans in the North, just because somebody believed that slavery was wrong did not mean that they believed that blacks and whites were equal. Okay, there was a lot of people, especially in the North, who believed that slavery was wrong, but they still felt that whites were superior. Okay, they were still racist. There was a lot of people, though, who were not. There was a lot of abolitionists who believed that black folks and white folks were equal, that the color of your skin did not change the content of your character. And when you meet somebody like let me see. Did I pass it? Yeah. When we get somebody like Frederick Douglass, okay, I've got a picture of him right here, right? We get somebody like Frederick Douglass. I imagine, after having read some of his stuff and hearing about him, I imagine it would be really, really hard to meet somebody like Frederick Douglass, a black man, and not think, wow, he is, like, black people can definitely be equal to whites. I mean, he was so brilliant and so clever. And of course, he educated himself, but the reason why there are so many black folks who were not seen as smart as whites is because they've denied education. If you don't let people go to school, of course they're not going to be as smart as other folks. Or you abuse them, of course they're going to be more problematic. But in any case, I imagine it'd be hard to meet Frederick Douglass and not think that whites and blacks could be equal. Anyway, so still in the North, though, there was a lot of racism and segregation. Okay. A country in crisis, we see more situations. The bleeding Kansas, this idea that Kansas will get to choose if it's going to be slave state or free state, and a bunch of folks, everyone ran there to try to settle there. It seems like a lot of the anti-slave folks actually tried to move there, and then a lot of Southern folks just showed up to vote illegally. This is actually one of the very few situations where we have proof that there was illegal voting. Although there's not proof that it would have mattered. It seems like there's a lot of pro-slavery folks already there. John Brown is an interesting character. John Brown was, I think he would have been Antifa. If we're talking about today, he would have been Antifa. He is somebody who believed really, really strongly in his position and would do anything, even violence, to try and get that back. Now, not to say that Antifa is all violent, but the idea that you have to fight back, I think, is what we see, right? So Antifa really is just an anti-fascist. It's not an organized group. They don't have a leader. They don't even have much other than fight fascists, right? And fascists are folks who believe that there should be a single government. Nazi Germany was the most famous fascist government. Anyway, but today, this idea of somebody who is willing to fight back against something and even go so far as to be violent. This is what we see when we talk about our villains, too. I mean, John Brown, a hero to some, could be considered, similar to our supervillains, right? His idea is good. His goal is good, right, to end slavery. But then in order to do it, he does murder people, okay? Is it justified? Okay. Again, a lot of the people he's fighting and a lot of the Southerners, they also, I don't know how many of them murdered. The book doesn't say, although I think there definitely were. There was absolutely some anti-slavery, some abolitionists who were murdered. But there was definitely a bunch of them who were beaten up and who were hurt, okay, by these folks that he kills. So an eye for an eye. It's complicated. Okay. Moving on, we'll see down here. We'll see John Brown making a reappearance. Okay. This time he captures men and he tries to start an armed revolt. Specifically, arming black folks so that they can have their own revolt and they can be free. They can be part of it. It doesn't go the way he wants to, and he gets hung. So he's an interesting character. Was he a hero? Was he a villain? It's hard to say. When you fight up against something that is immoral, and you resort to violence in order to stop it, was it right for us to fight the Nazis? Right? That's the question. Sometimes immoral, you have to fight, but it's tough. Those sort of questions, okay? Which also goes into Socrates. Socrates would ask these kind of questions. Is it right to kill somebody for a just cause? A lot of important questions that don't have easy answers. Now I want to move over to both the Republican Party and the Dred Scott decision. This Republican Party, okay, it is the beginning of our modern Republican Party, but I will not say it is in any way similar. I dislike when folks today try to point to the Republican Party here and say, look, we're the same. There's too much has changed. The amount of people who are in it, the group of people who are in it are different, right? It is as similar today, the Republican Party today is as similar to this as this party is to the Democratic Republicans at the beginning of the country. Too much has changed. The name may be the same, but there was a huge flip in Democrats and Republicans back in the 1930s. So huge changes. If somebody has to go and point to all the way back to here to say whether or not they've their views, then I feel like, what have you done for me lately? Anyway, but this is the beginning of the modern Republican Party. And Lincoln is going to be the first president from here. Spoiler alert. I want to talk about this Dred Scott decision. Okay, this is one of the most important things that happened during this time, and I think it's really interesting when we have Southern states claiming that the North was going to take away their slaves and that the North was infringing upon state rights. What we see specifically with the Dred Scott decision is that the South was very specifically trying to, and because the court was packed with Southern judges, okay? So that's something the book doesn't tell you that you need to know. And these Southern judges allowed this Dred Scott case to come to the Supreme Court. And then, unanimously, they said that black folks are not citizens, okay? He is not even allowed to petition the courts. And then two, they go on and they do this runaway verdict where they say something that's almost not really connected to the case. They say that since slaves were the personal property of slaveholders, Congress never had the authority to restrict slavery in the territories. This rendered the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional. They also begin to create this idea that if one state holds it true, then the other states have to recognize this. Okay? So they're saying that if slavery is true in the South, then if it's held true in South Carolina, then somebody who moves to New York with his slaves should be able to keep his slaves. Well, how can that be? If the North says that they are against slavery, but you move to the North with your slaves, okay? Who's right there? There's a hypocrisy here, right? Where they kind of claim that the rights of the folks in the South to have slaves supersedes the right of the northern states to not have slaves, which states' rights, right? So should the North's rights be held, or should the Southern rights be held? This court and what the South was trying to go for was the idea that the Southern rights were more important than the Northern rights, which of course is why I say it's hypocrisy. It's funny in the ironic sense that the South will say that the North was trying to take away their slaves when the South was trying to take away the North's ability to not have slaves. We'll get into more of this in class. I have a few different things about Lincoln and about this that will show up in our class later this month. Okay, so we see aggression starting to boil over. Lincoln and Douglas. Okay, we see we're gonna actually read some of their responses from both Douglas and Lincoln in class. We have a whole thing of Douglas and then Lincoln's response. We're also going to talk about this house divided against itself. This is a really important speech that Lincoln does. It's important for two reasons. One, because what he points out about the Dred Scott case. Okay, that specifically he's talking about how the South is trying to spread slavery to the North. Two, when he says that it'll either all become all one thing or all the other, his wording on that, I don't think he realized how important that was going to be. It is these words right here that some people say is why we have had the Civil War. because these words here were what the South pointed to when they claimed that Lincoln was going to try and take away their slaves. Because Lincoln had not said he was going to take away their slaves. He was not even president when the South declared that they were going to leave. He was just president-elect. He had not been sworn in yet. He had no policy decisions that he was planning on making. And yet the South claimed that he was coming after their slaves and they were going to leave the Union before he could. Okay? Before he even said anything. Because of this statement. Or at least that's what they say. Election of 1860. Okay. This is where we have a crowded field and Lincoln becomes president. Part of this is some people think that because the Southern folks were so divided as to whether or not you wanted to, the Unionists who this guy just wants to stay, wants everyone to kind of just remain neutral, and these two, which both were pro-slavery, and Lincoln was the only one who was seen as anti-slavery or just seen as a little bit more aggressive. And it's possible that because the North didn't split their vote and the South did, that Lincoln won. Though I would say that even that's not entirely accurate, right? Because 72 votes to 12, you add those two together and Lincoln's still going to win, okay? Lincoln had the most amount of the electoral votes, okay? Even all three of these combined, Lincoln still has the most electoral votes, okay? Southern states secede. We're going to go into a little bit about what they say for why they seceded, but spoiler alert, they say it's because they want to keep their slaves. Anyone who talks about how the Southern states left the Union because of the Northern aggression or because the North was not respecting states' rights, they're lying or they're purposefully misrepresenting what the South said. The South very specifically said they were leaving because they were worried that the North was going to take away their slaves. They thought that the North didn't have the authority to take away their slaves, even though, again, the South has been arguing this whole time that that they should say whether or not a station can or cannot have slaves, right? As much as the South is saying that the North is not respecting states' rights, the South is not respecting the Northern rights of anti-slavery, right? It goes both ways. But in any case, the South is going to claim that they need to secede, and that is going to start us off on the Civil War. Not right away. Lincoln is not aggressive right away. The only thing that happens, and the first shots at Fort Sumter, this was just Lincoln was like, "Hey, okay, let's talk about this. We don't need to secede. Let's have a conversation." But there was a group of Union soldiers at Fort Sumter, and the South was getting ready to attack them. They were sieging it. They would not let any food in, and they wanted the Unionists to surrender. So the North goes and just tries to send food in. It tries to send some food and supplies to the garrison, and that is what is going to start the Civil War. Is the South is going to fire on the North for coming to try to resupply the fort, and that is the beginning of the Civil War. The South fires first. The North is just trying to resupply their soldiers. The South fires first. I think there's just so much misinformation around today, so that's why I make a big deal about it. Anyway, guys, remember the question I have for you at the beginning was, which group do you think of when we're talking about the Fugitive Slave Act and the Federal Marshals? Which federal organization now that, say, in Oregon is not supported, we don't support, and we try to protect different states, this sort of issue. What do you guys think of? All right. Have a good one, guys. Bye.